Yeah, you can close the door there. Dawn's not going to make it, but she's supposed to be watching. So, Dawn, if you're watching, we're expecting you to watch. So, anyway, so I want to share something with you all, and particularly I want to get it on the video, which Emily will already know. We learned something last Tuesday morning that blew me away. Let me tell you this, though. Tuesday night I shared that. They weren't nearly as excited about it as I was. It blew me away. I was so excited about this, and I couldn't wait to share it. So if you're not excited, at least act excited, okay? So I gave you the teaser in the email, but I didn't want to explain it. But this is what it was. Last week, as we talked about Rachel, sitting on that camel's saddle, with the household gods hidden in the pouches underneath, and she told Laban that she couldn't get up because, quote, the manner of women is upon me, which is how the New American Standard puts it. And we know that she was referring to her menstrual cycle, and all the commentaries said that. Everything I read said that. And we noted that if she had hidden them there, and if she was having her period, that would defile them. And they wouldn't be able to be used anyway. So, what a conundrum that was. They would be rendered useless. And as I said, every commentary I read said that. But think about this. First of all, what if she was lying? What if she was? And that didn't cross my mind either.
She was lying.
You thought she was lying, and the commentaries really didn't say. They just said it was a foregone conclusion. That's what it was. But she could have been lying.
Because women have always used that.
There you go. Now remember, we got to keep it PG. But
That's all I was going to say.
and that's. But here's what. On Tuesday night, as we said, that's certainly plausible. She could have been lying. But as someone mentioned Tuesday night, if she was having her period, then everyone, except Laban, of course, but everyone would have known it because she would have been unclean. Jacob would have known it, Leah would have known it, everybody else would have known it because she would have been sort of sequestered off anyway. Everybody would have known that, so they would know if she was lying or not. Yes, being unclean was recognized in the Mosaic Law, which doesn't come until later, but it probably was just as true before the Mosaic Law. But here's the thing, something else to think about, and this is very plausible as well. What if she was lying, but not only lying, what if she was pregnant? Did that cross anybody's mind? Mm-hmm. Didn't cross my mind at all. But when Janice wrote her, her Bible, in fact, I texted her today and I said, what translation were you, what study Bible? Because it was in the study Bible part of it. And so she actually sent me a picture of it. That had never crossed my mind. But when you think about it, and like I said, none of the commentaries even hinted at that or suggested that. But if you think about it, we'll see in chapter 35, and we know that Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin, but that's not a very long time. That's not more than 6 or 8 months after this. So it's certainly plausible that she was pregnant. And we've mentioned many times that years can pass in just a few short verses. But these next chapters, when you read through them, they are pretty much on a timeline. They pretty much floated. It's not a day-to-day thing, but it's not more than 6 or 8 months' time that will pass in the next few chapters that we read. But I was just like, never thought about that.
Were they considered unclean when they were pregnant?
Yeah, that was my question.
I don't think so. That's a good question. I don't remember reading that. Sandy, have you?
I've never read. I've never heard
like
that.
Elizabeth and
Yeah.
No, Elizabeth, and Mary. No, I don't think so. I don't think they were.
Well, if she was pregnant, she was lying for sure.
She was lying for sure. Yeah. So, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought that yes, she was lying, because I don't think she would have even been willing to defile the household gods.
But if she wasn't sitting on it, where was it?
No, they were there. They were there, and she was sitting on them, but she was pregnant instead of being her menstrual cycle.
I just wonder, what did they look like if she could sit on them?
Well, no. She's sitting on the saddle.
Probably under the saddle.
This saddle is not like our Western saddles. The way they're made is they've got these pouches on the sides of them. So they were in these pouches. And she was sitting on this, kind of like, actually the way I understood, one of the commentaries, best I remember, said they were actually more like a chair, and you could actually take them off and use them for sitting. So that's what she was doing with
But
it.
how would they know that she was having her menstrual cycle if she didn't tell
Because she would be unclean and wouldn't
but
be able.
how would they know that? I mean,
No, meaning she couldn't associate with the rest of it. She would have to be off to herself.
Yeah,
That's how they would
She
know.
didn't tell anybody. She
Well,
wouldn't-
Oh, you
He's
going?
not gonna make her get up if she's unclean.
Yeah.
Search the
Yeah.
saddle.
Yeah.
Under the saddle.
You mean the rest of the family and so
Yeah.
forth?
yeah, I mean, you would have to tell them.
That's not something you're going to. You have to sequester.
Yeah,
So whether you tell them or not, if you get off by yourself, then they're going to know.
yeah.
So, but anyway, I just had to share that and wanted to make sure it got on the video.
My
But
thoughts were that, she lied, and the reason that she got by with it is maybe she had just started, it
Yeah.
was just,
Yeah.
so it wasn't
Yeah.
something that was a couple days into.
it'd still be unclean.
Well, it could justify
A little bit unclean is the same as all unclean. You can't be just a little bit pregnant. That's right. Yeah.
A little bit pregnant.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Okay, well, let's jump into chapter 22 then. In chapter 22, 32. Yeah, it's 32. All right, in chapter 32, in the Hebrew Bible, chapter 32 begins with verse 55 of chapter 31. There are a lot of scriptures that are that way. The last verse actually goes with the next chapter, and that's in the Hebrew Bible because they're in scrolls, so they're in sections. We know in the Bible as a whole there were not chapter and verse breaks, but there were breaks in sections in the Old Testament part of it. But so verse 55 of chapter 31 said, and early in the morning, this is after the treaty had been made and the sacrifice and the meal on the mountain. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his grandsons and his daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Now Jacob went on his way. So the next morning, they just part directions. Laban goes back, and by the way, I got the map. Got around to getting the map printed for you, and we see the line coming down. I don't know why they did them both in green, but anyway, the line coming down is Jacob leaving Laban, which would be right up here, well, on the small one, where Herod would be right about where the word Jacob is on this little map, but this is the pull-out section. But as he comes down, you can see the mountains of Gilead there, where he met with Laban, or where Laban met up with him, and then he goes on from there, and you see this Penuel. That's where this takes place today. But they parted, and they went opposite directions. And these next few chapters represent actually the high point in Jacob's spiritual life. Several of the commentaries mention that what Mount Moriah was to Abraham, the northern bank of the Jabbok River is to Jacob. You can see there where the Jabbok River is, just out from that call out right there. That's where this takes place. It was a place that he had to answer to God. Abraham had to answer to God when he took Isaac there to Mount Moriah. Jacob has to answer to God here. And it's a place where this final answer to God's question of, do you really trust me, must be answered. As we said, Abraham struggled with that. Abraham wrestled with that in a way, all the way to Moriah, I'm sure. But Jacob wrestled with it all night long. There's a fly in here, isn't it? Let me get your fly swat. Oh, I don't know where it went. Oh well. There are many stories. We know these stories from the book of Genesis. We know them from Vacation Bible School. We know them from Sunday school lessons. We know these stories, but I hope in the way that we've studied this, it helps you to put these stories together and to get the flow of how it all happens and what result they brought. We know the story of Jacob's ladder. We know the story of Jacob's wrestling with the angel. But without this, we would not know what happened in between that. We would not know that 20 years lapsed between those two encounters. And that's important, not only time-wise, but in terms of Jacob's spiritual growth. And so after this treaty that we read about last week, both Laban and Jacob, as we said, went their opposite ways. Jacob enters back into the land that was promised. And first of all, as he enters in, he's met by angels. The rest of chapter 1, as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Now, and Jacob said when he saw them, this is God's camp. Well, the angels met him, this camp. The word camp there, you may have a different word. I've got camp or company is what's here in mine. But it's a word that can mean encampment. Well, when I read that, I'm just thinking, they just camped out. But I didn't really realize a better word for that is host. It was a host of angels. Some of the one of the translations that I can't think of the name of that translation right now, but it calls it, anytime you see the word host, it would be the Lord's armies. So that's what this is a huge number of angels. He saw many angels going up and down the ladder or the staircase, but here this is also a huge number of angels. It is a whole company. You think in terms of military. It was a company. Now, they may have been lined up in formation or whatever, we don't know, but it was a company's worth of angels. And so Jacob named that place, and I thought I knew how to pronounce it. We just talked about pronouncing. Malkanahim. He named it because that word means a host or it means a camp. In chapter 28, verse 12, when he left the land of promise, angels, as we said, appeared to him in a dream. And we said then he saw them going up and down that staircase or that ladder. And it said that showed them in their ministry. They were coming out and going in, and they were doing the things that angels do. Angels don't just sit around and play harps, or what was the old commercial, the Philly cream cheese. They don't just sit on clouds and eat cream cheese. No, they have things they do. They were constantly working. And this was a host or a whole camp of them. And here they are again as he returns. But this time he sees them in person. The Lord opened his eyes and he's able to actually see them. Just like that scene in, in Kings where Elisha, the enemy is there, and the servant is scared, and the Elisha prays, Lord, open his eyes so that he may see. And when he goes out and he can see this whole encampment, and it's the same kind of thing. This whole encampment of angels surrounding them, much more than the enemy was. But some writers indicated that the angels protected or surrounded the promised land. He saw them as he went out. And now he's seeing them as he comes back in. And that Jacob was allowed to see them as he left and allowed to see them when he returned. But just like that's the only place they were. They were surrounding the promised land and protecting it. But the more I thought about it, I had to wonder if they had not been with him the whole time he was gone, traveling with him, protecting him, coming back with him. Hebrews 1 verse 14, in speaking of the angels, says, "Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who will inherit salvation?" Now we read that because it's in the New Testament. We automatically say, well, that's us. Well, it's them too. My opinion is I think they've been with him all along. But as I said, he saw them in a dream before. But now God has opened his eyes and allowed him to see this host of angels encamped around him. And don't you know that had to encourage him? He's dealt with Laban, but he knows the reason that he left Canaan to start with has not been resolved. And as far as we know, Jacob never heard from his mother. Remember, she said, I want you to go and stay with your Uncle Laban a few days.
Yeah.
Just a few days until Esau's anger goes away. We don't know that he ever heard from her. In fact, we don't know how long she lived after he left. It could have been a very short period of time. But however long it was, he never heard that Esau's anger had abated. And he's got to be thinking about that. As we said, it's been 20 years. And where Esau has settled, there, you can see this red line down here at Edom. That's the track that Esau brought coming up to meet him. But that's where Esau had settled, way south of Canaan. And Jacob didn't have to go anywhere near where Esau lived. But he knew it would only be a matter of time before Esau heard he was back. And those angels did appear to him, you know. They did show him he was not alone. I mean, he just dealt with Laban. He just got that over with. Might as well deal with Esau and get that over with too, right? But then he may have thought in a moment, what was I thinking here? So verses 2 through 5. Jacob, when he saw them, this is God's camp. He named the place Machanaim, and then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom. And he also commanded them, saying, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau." In fact, he's being very reverent here. He's being very humble here. He's not saying, "I'm back." You know, he said, "Say, be respectful when you speak to him. Say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob." Of course, when he left there, he'd received the blessing. The older was going to serve the younger, but he doesn't point that out. He says, "I want to be his servant. Thus says your servant Jacob. I have sojourned with Laban, and I have stayed there until now." That word stayed can also be translated as been detained, but he stayed there until now, these 20 years. "And I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants." Remember, anytime you've got an "and" between every one of those, that means each one is important in its own right. You don't just put commas in there. And an and an and. Each one of those is important. "And I have sent to tell my Lord," again, very respectful, "so that I might find favor," or I like the King James here, "I might find grace in your eyes." Can I find grace?
And kindness.
And kindness. Can I find that in your sight? Essentially, Jacob was saying, and the wording indicates he was saying it in a very humble manner. He wasn't bragging. "Look what all I've got. I went up there and this is what I come back with. Look at what all I've got." He wasn't saying, "Look, I've acquired all this in this 20 years. What he's saying is, "I've got this. I don't need anything that you have. I just want to find grace. I just want to find favor." Or Sandy said, kindness in your sight. I want the strife between us to be over. But then the messengers come back, verse 6. "And they returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and furthermore he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Now that would
That would give them pause.
That would cause pause right there. But now here, it's really interesting, and I love reading a lot of different commentaries because as we say so many times, they're just written by human beings. Now, granted, human beings with a lot more education than I have. They know the tenses, they speak, the languages and all that stuff. But still, it amazes me how they can come up with different conclusions. And they read the same words. And they read the same tenses, but they have different conclusions. And again, I know I've said this many times, but it keeps going back to the fact of what was your mindset when you started this study? If you thought Jacob was a horrible person, it's going to take a lot to change your mind. And it has changed my mind about a lot of these characters that we have studied. Because I had these ideas, and I'd heard sermons or I'd heard stories and I had ideas of what their mindset were and they should have done better. But the more I've gotten to know them as just real people, I look at them more now through the lens of this, the old thing, when you point a finger out, three fingers are pointing out. That's more of how I look at them now because I see myself in them so much. But these commentaries disagree on what's happening here in verse 6. Some say that Esau had already heard that Jacob was back and was coming with 400 men. Because remember, Esau doesn't know Jacob's intent. He doesn't know why he's back now. Maybe he had heard that Jacob had a huge entourage of people and he doesn't know, are they fighting men? He doesn't know who's with Jacob.
They don't know that about each other.
They don't know that about each other. All Esau knows is what happened last time. And so Esau is coming in a defensive manner. That's one view of this. Others say that Esau came with that many men in order to show how he had prospered. Look at all that I've got. Look at all that I command. But the question arises, did the messengers actually talk to Esau? Or did they just see him from the top of a hill and say, I ain't going down there? So that the phrase that says they came to Esau can also be translated as they came near. My opinion, my thought on it is that they only saw him from a distance, saw this huge number of men he had with him, and hightailed it back to tell Jacob.
But how did they know that he was coming to meet him?
Because he's coming that direction. They may not know for sure. They may have talked to him. We don't know. It doesn't say that they talked to him. But if they talked to him, how did they get back so much quicker than he did? Because it's still like 3-4 more days before Esau will be there.
Human nature, if these people were in Jacob's camp, then it seems like they would be automatically a little reticent to come down and join those 400 men. It's like you said, we don't know. They didn't know what his intention was.
Yep.
And so it seems to me like they would have kind of looked before they leaped, sort of thing.
And we don't know how much Jacob had told them about Esau and about the whole reason for him being in Haran to start with.
Yeah. I would think he would not have shared.
I would think he would have not told everything. He might have said, we had a disagreement or, something. Yeah, we had a little tiff. Yeah, right. That's putting it mildly.
Esau really, he might have not even been mad.
Might have not been.
Because it don't really say that, he's out to, he said he's coming for you.
They don't know that. They just see.
They didn't have cell phones back then.
Yeah. They see him coming with 400 men or a guesstimate. I'm sure they didn't count them, but a lot of men, and so they come back. Well, of course, Jacob's going to be scared. Either way, Jacob also remembered what happened before. Verses 7 and 8. Then Jacob, it says, Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He wasn't just afraid. He wasn't just distressed. He was greatly afraid. He was shaking in his boots, greatly afraid and distressed. And so he divided up the people who were with him, the flocks and herds, everything they had, into two companies. For he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. And then he prayed. And I asked in your lesson, do we make plans and then pray? Or do we pray first and then plan?
I would say yes.
Yes. I put down here, I'm sure we all pray first. And then we make our plans, right? Sure.
No, we make our plans and then we pray for God to
this is what I want to do, God. Now, make it work out. But and again, this is what I'm learning from this. Somehow we want to berate Jacob for the commentaries all did. They want to berate Jacob for acting first and then praying. When we all do that. I've often said that prayer should be our first response rather than our last resort. But how many times do we do that? There have been occasions when I did. One instance that specific comes to mind, I got a really disturbing phone call, and the first thing out of my mouth when I hung up was, I must tell Jesus. The hymn, I must tell Jesus. And I went immediately to my knees, but I don't, that's rare, truly, if I'm just real honest about it. I want to start trying to do stuff, get stuff fixed, and we just start doing. I caught myself this morning when I start writing these lessons each week. I just sit down and just jump in and start writing. And then I'll say, oh, yeah, I really should have prayed first. And then I pray and maybe this is just an excuse, but I think that what it is with us is that we truly expect God to lead us.
Yeah.
If we are His, He will lead us, right? Do we have to ask every time? Does God say, well, gee, if you'd just asked, I'd have done that, but no, you didn't ask. Too bad. I don't think God does that. But here's the thing. He condescends to our weakness. We really should pray first.
But how? Do we pray every time we go to the dishwasher and put a dish in? How do we?
Well, yeah. In what things? Yeah. You can't you can't pray over every move like that.
Yeah.
But we can pray over everything we start to do.
Well, like we go to the store, do we pray first?
Pray for. I know a guy that does but before he goes to do anything, he'll pray. Okay, is this the day I should do this? Because we all know things that happen, and people, you hear the stories of the Twin Towers. Like one guy was late getting to work because he dropped his child off at daycare and got tied up there. There are things that happen that God prevents or injury. Joe and I were at a friend's house up toward Greenville one night, and we started to leave. Now this was way before either of us had kids. We started to leave, and he'd just been called into the ministry and didn't know how to tie a tie. And he asked Joe, will you show me how to tie a tie? So we went back in. Joe ties the tie, pulls it off so he could just slip it over his head, We come down the interstate, and there had been a head-on wreck, that if we'd been 10 minutes sooner. I believe to this day that God prevented us from leaving when we left. I just believe those kinds of things. So maybe we should be more diligent in praying even about mundane things. But in Jacob's case, he acted and then he prayed, but at least he prayed. Proverbs 16:23 says, all the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, meaning if I'm going to do it, I think it's right. But the Lord weighs the motives. Commit your works to the Lord and your plans will be established. But again, what we think about Jacob's actions will depend on what we think about Jacob. Well, do we think he's just rushing ahead and then expecting God to bless it? Or do we think that he's, as we said last time, doing what he knows to do?
What is your opinion?
I don't know. I really don't. Well, I'll just be honest with you. As I was working on this, I was leaning more toward he was doing what he knew to do. And then he spent time in prayer. And I had this in there and then I took it back out. But what I had down was that God and I do believe this, but God gives us sense. He gives us good sense. He gives us logic. He gives us the ability to do things. And so if we act, I think we are acting expecting that God is a part of our lives and he's given us the good sense to do this. But the more I've studied this, the more I worked on this, the more I was convicted about that statement. The more I began to say, no, he should have prayed first. The more the lesson begin. What I do, if you don't know, I've got a notebook and as I read the commentaries, I make notes in this and I divide it up and then I go through that to put the lesson together. And the more I began to pull all these things together that I had read, the more I began to be convicted about the way Jacob was doing it. And maybe I've been doing it that way. So, I'm getting way more out of this than you all are. But he does eventually pray.
What about that scripture that says a good man's steps are ordered by the Lord?
Exactly. There are those. That's that logic that I believe God gives us the ability to do. But I'm talking about this specific situation, this specific person at this specific time, and therefore I'm holding up a mirror and saying, okay, what am I learning from this? But he does pray. So verses 9 through 12. And Jacob said, and as we've said for the last few weeks, Jacob is a very spiritually immature, we would say Christian, an immature believer. He is a believer. I do believe he is saved. I believe that happened back in chapter 28 there at Bethel. But he's growing in this. He ain't there yet. And neither are we. So verse 9. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac. Now this is, and I have read this is not saying that he didn't say it's my God, it's my father's God. That's not what it is at all, because of the way the next word when he says, O Lord. He is speaking to the covenant God. So he is a believer. He does belong to the Lord. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac. O Lord, who did say to me, this is back in chapter 31, verse 3, you told me, return to your country and your relatives, and I will, my translation says prosper you, but what he said is I will be with you. It doesn't mean prosper like I'll give you lots of stuff. I will be with you. I'll take care of you. He said, Lord, you told me to come back. Verse 10, I am unworthy. I am less than my father's was. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown to me, to thy servant. For with my staff only, and that's how we know he left with nothing. With my staff only, I crossed this Jordan River. That's all I had when I left going there. And now I have become two companies. He's already divided them into two. I have two companies. And he goes on with a plea. We see his humility. We saw first his recalling the event, and then we saw his humility, and now we see his plea. This is a good pattern for prayer, by the way. Verse 11, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother and from the hand of Esau. Or not but from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he come to attack me, the mothers with the children. And then he repeats the promise, for you did say, you did tell me, I will surely take care of you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So then, that was his prayer. And I think that was a very earnest prayer. I think that was a prayer from a believer. And so then after he prays, he spent the night there, but it doesn't look like he slept much. Because during the night, he came up with what he thought was a better plan. But he didn't pray about this one either. And I'm just going to kind of go over this quickly, verses 13 through 21. So he says he spent the night there, and then the next morning, of course, because he doesn't do that in the middle of the night, so it's the next morning, he selected from what he had. That word from there is an important word. He selected from, meaning he had a whole lot more. He selected specific ones from what he had with him as a present. He probably picked out the prettiest. Remember, he's got all these spotted and speckled. He probably picked out the prettiest ones that he had. By the way, I haven't read it yet, but I got a text from Joe Jr. and he's got a picture of a speckled puppy. I know he's saying, you need this dog. And it's a cute puppy, but I don't want another dog. But anyway, he picked out the cutest ones, the prettiest ones. He selected from what he had as a present for his brother Esau. And this is just a few of what he picked out. 200 female goats and 20 male goats. 200 ewes and 20 rams. 30 milking camels along with their colts. 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. In case you added that up, that's 580 animals. Just from what he has.
Makes you wonder what he did have.
Well, yeah, how many were left? And he delivered it. Here's the plan. He gives them into his hand of his servants, and he says to them, pass on before me. So he divides these up. He's got the goats, and he's got the sheep, and then he's got the camels and so forth. They're all divided up. And he says to them, pass on before me and put a space between each of you. So you won't arrive all at the same time. And he commanded the one in front, the first group, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and says, and asks you, saying, to whom, this is important, to whom do you belong, where you're going, and to whom do these animals in front of you belong? Now, we just read over that and say, this is the guy that goes with this group. What's important about that is this shepherd or this person in charge of these animals is behind the animals. Normally, he would be in front of the animals. So here's the picture. Esau would be coming, and here'd be this 200, the first group there, the 200 female goats and 20 male goats, and nobody around. And then he gets to the end of them, and then here's the shepherd. Who are you? Who are you with? And what about all these animals that just came through here? And this is what you're to say to him. These belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he, Jacob, is also behind us. And so they would do that with each group. The second group, the third group, all who followed the groves, do the same thing. Say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And then finally say, behold, your servant Jacob is also behind us. For he said, I will appease him, hopefully, appease him with the present that goes before me. And then afterward I will see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. So they take off. That takes a day to get all that together. And so at the end of that day, verse 21, so the present, what he was given, passed on before him, while he himself spent that night in the camp. So he's still on the northern side of the Jabbok River. He still has the two companies. I'm sure he divided them, Leah in one and Rachel in one. But he's still got the two companies. They're still separated, but he's still there on the northern side of the Jabbok River. But he still can't sleep. So now look at verses 22 and 23. And he arose that same night. And he took, it's night. And took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children, he's not counting Diana, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. And then the first part of verse 24, then Jacob was left alone. Likely all that Jacob had with him was his staff. The same way, as the saying goes, naked I came into this world and naked I go out. He had that staff when he left the first time. He doesn't say that. I just imagine that. Just like at that night at Bethel 20 years ago, he had the staff. Matthew Henry said that Jacob sent them all across the river because he wanted to be alone to pray. Maybe. I think he didn't know what else to do.
I think he was afraid.
I think he was frantic.
Yeah.
He's just trying to, he keeps coming up with these plans. Oh, let's do this. No, let's do this. No, let's do this. On the one hand, as he has just prayed, God told him to come back. And God has promised to take care of him. But Esau's coming. God had promised to make his descendants as the sand of the sea. But Esau's coming. He's the one through whom the covenant is to be continued. But Esau's coming. If Esau kills him, the Abrahamic covenant stops here. The seed of the woman will never be born if Esau kills him. Jacob knows that. And he's confident that everything will be fine, but he's still afraid.
He just wants to help God out.
Yeah. It's going to be okay. It is. It's going to be okay. But Esau's coming. And so he is still afraid, and so he wrestles with himself and with his faith. And also physically. I believe this is a physical wrestling with God. In a sense, Jacob had wrestled with God his whole life. He had sought to succeed by his own strength, by his own methods. But now, whose will is more important? Is Jacob's will, is his real concern for personal protection, or is his concern for God's purposes? Where's his real concern lie? We can sit here 4,000 years later and say, as one commentary did, it was not the immediate danger that should have been the burden of Jacob's prayers, but rather it should have been the accomplishment of God's will for mankind everywhere. Yeah. 4,000 years later, it's easy to say that, but when you're sitting there and Esau's coming,
it might have crossed his mind.
I'm sure that was part of the wrestling.
Yeah.
God said this is going to happen, so I can trust God, but Esau's coming. Exactly. That's easy to say until you're the one facing the danger. So the question for Jacob now is, does he trust God or not? And as we come to this section of this chapter, this is where we have our questions. As I wrote in your lesson, I'm sure you've got questions about this. I've always had questions about this. Haven't quite been able to figure it out because it just doesn't seem to make sense. And I want to make sure that we answer, or at least address your questions, whether or not I can answer them. But what I want to do is let me read this first, and then if I don't address your question, feel free to ask questions or comment or whatever. Just you got to stop me sometimes. As I said, I do believe it was a physical encounter. Somebody asked me the other day. They said, "Are you a dispensationalist?" And I said, "Well, knowing what I know now, what a dispensationalist is, I guess I am, but I always was before I ever knew what the word meant. A dispensationalist is somebody that takes every word of the Bible as literal. In its genre, of course. I mean, we know a parable is a parable, and we know that prophecy is prophecy. But, yeah, if it says they physically wrestled, then yeah. I may not understand it, but the Bible said it, and I believe it. I believe it literally. That's the way I've always been. So I believe that it was a physical encounter, a physical wrestling around in the dark and in the dirt there on the northern side of the Jabbok River, and I believe it was a physical manifestation of God, just like that man that ate that meal with Abraham and then walked with Abraham a while and tried to decide am I going to tell him what I'm about to do to Sodom or not. This man that wrestled with Jacob was just as real and just as physical as that man was. That's what I believe. So, and so I'm going to read this. In fact, I went through my Bible and capitalized all the ones that should be forgotten. I'm going to read it that way. So that, because when you say he and he and he and he, sometimes who's the he? So that's the way I'm going to read it. I'm going to read the rest of this section, and we'll go back and talk about it. And when then Jacob was left alone. And a man, God, I believe, wrestled with Jacob until daybreak. And when God saw that God had not prevailed against Jacob, God touched the socket of Jacob's thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while God wrestled with him. And then God said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So God said to him, "What is your name?" God said to him, "What is your name?" And Jacob said, "Jacob." And God said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven," or you have wrestled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked God and said, "Please tell me your name." But God said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And God blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore, and then Moses adds this bit of information for these Israelites who are hearing this. "Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip which is on the socket of the thigh, because God touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of his hip." So first of all, I think our questions arise because we read this from a human perspective. I mean, there's no other way for us to read it except from the human perspective. But we have to make ourselves look at it in a different way. Because we would say, "What do you mean God could not prevail against Jacob? Are you telling me God couldn't beat Jacob in a wrestling match? I mean, come on." So, right? Is that the question you had when you read that? It's always been my question. You mean God couldn't beat him? God could not prevail against him, it said. But what it is really saying is not that God couldn't beat Jacob, but that Jacob would not surrender to God.
Free will.
Free will.
Yes, against free will.
Exactly. Jacob would not surrender.
And God will never override our free will.
Well, we have some differences of opinion in some situations on that.
Well, right,
But
we are
this,
given,
we are given that free will.
Free will, and I assume he wasn't too.
Yeah.
So God's not going to override his free will.
Jacob would not surrender, and
Is that what
God
you're
would
saying?
not prevail against him. Jacob was still resistant to God. I mean, we've talked about him being spiritually immature. And as we said, he acted earlier in this chapter, and then he prayed, but then he came up with another plan, and he didn't pray over that one. And then he came up with a third plan, and he didn't pray over that one. And then the wrestling began. Do you trust me or not?
Well, could you say that God, it said he could not.
He could not.
But could you also say he would not?
It says could not. But let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish on that. Jacob believed in God. He listened to God. He prayed to God, but he was not fully surrendered to God. There are Christians today who believe in God. They believe in Jesus Christ. They love Jesus Christ. They believe Jesus died for their sins, but they have not fully surrendered themselves to him. That doesn't mean they're not saved. They're, as Evelyn Laycock used to say, they're missing out on a lot of blessings, but they're not fully surrendered.
Do you think that's humanly possible?
I do, because of what this tells us. And there's, let me back up on. There still will. It's a work in progress. Always a work in progress. I think we will never be fully surrendered
Until we see him.
Until we have our glorified bodies. This gets a little over my head, but when you talk about justification, sanctification, and glorification, justification is when you're saved. As some pastors say, just as if you haven't sinned. Sanctification, John Wesley called it a going on to sanctification. It's always a work in progress. You will get closer. I believe, let me be careful how I say this. I believe we can reach a point, well, the way Andy Woods puts it, I really like, we will never be sinless, but we can sin less.
Yeah. Well,
as we go on to sanctification, and then glorification is when we see him and we have our resurrected, glorified bodies.
I always thought that the sanctification was the, as I think Ephesians says, the transformation of our mind. It's the maturity.
Well, it's not just our minds. It's everything. It is the growing in maturity. It's an ongoing thing. Did you start to say something else?
Well, I was just going to say, we can attest to that with our own lives.
Yeah.
Because we can look back and see, we'll shake our head and say, good grief.
Can't believe I did that or said that. Yeah.
And then, and you have less and less of a desire. Sin is less attractive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you move on, and we can see that process.
Yeah.
Ourselves.
Yeah. And so, we won't ever be completely sinless until we're in our glorified bodies. But it's a more and more surrender. And as you mature in your faith and your growth, we get closer and closer. Jacob believed in God. He listened to God, as I said. He prayed to God, but he was not fully surrendered to God. He still wanted to be in control. And so God had to simply touch the socket of Jacob's hip, and it was dislocated. He would forever limp. He would forever remember that night that God surrendered him. He didn't surrender, but God surrendered him. One writer said, and this will get to what you said a minute ago, there is a limit beyond which God is not prepared to go in his dealings with mankind. That's when he overrides the will. He will give you your head. He will give you your will so far. He will not overpower your will so far.
And you know that's so true, Betty, because as I've told you many times, God had
Exactly, that's exactly what it is.
I was gone.
Yeah.
And I only went so far. And
Yeah,
God started
that's
reeling
as
me
far as he would let you go. God could not, with more wrestling, prevail. It didn't matter if he'd wrestled the next 6 months with Jacob. Jacob was not going to surrender. He was not going to submit until God surrendered him. Hard times was never going to do it. It would take something more. It would take touching Jacob's own body. I tell you, this is one of the scariest things to me that you can imagine. Some people will simply not submit to the Lord until something in their lives is dislocated. Either in their own bodies, in their abilities, in some other personal area, physical, financial, emotional, until they themselves are touched. Paul had to be knocked to the ground. David had to lose a child before they would come back, or before they would come to bring. God did that to bring them to himself. Verse 26 again, God said to Jacob then, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And so, again, from our human viewpoint, you're like, what do you mean? Jacob won't let God go. You can't tell me Jacob's holding on to God and God can't get loose. Does Jacob still think he's in control here? But Jacob was not prevailing against God. Jacob was desperate. Jacob was hanging on for dear life at this point. Another writer put it this way: when that happens, when you're hanging on for dear life, you hold on in a different way. You crumble, you cling, you beg for mercy and blessing, not because you deserve it, but because you have nothing else to hold on to. And God said to Jacob, "What's your name?" And we're like, wait a minute. God doesn't know Jacob's name.
Oh, by the way.
By the way, what's your name?
Make sure I got that.
Yeah, make sure I got the right guy here. Yeah. Oh, wait, got the wrong guy. Let me back up. Yeah. But we've said this so many times. God never asks a question for his information. Why is it God asks questions?
He wants to see what we
He wants
know.
to see if we know.
Exactly. He wants us to say it. He wants to make the person to make us answer. God made Jacob say it. Say it. Say it. Say it. What's your name? Say it. I am Jacob. I'm a supplanter. I'm a deceiver. I'm a wheeler dealer. I believe in you, but I want to do it my own way. That's who he was.
Wow.
And God made him say it. Jonathan Cahn, and I don't always go along with everything Jonathan Cahn says. Sometimes he's a little out there, but I loved how he put this. Now you have to listen close because it sounds confusing, but listen close. Jonathan Cahn said in chapter 27, when Esau asked him, "Who are you?" In chapter 27, when Jacob said he was not Jacob, he said he was Esau, he was being a Jacob. He was being a deceiver. But now, when he said he was Jacob, he's not being a Jacob anymore. He's being an Israel. He's joined to God. He is now someone who struggled with God and with man and prevailed. Not prevailed over God, but prevailed over Jacob. Jacob had wrestled with everyone his whole life, from the womb until now. And now he had finally prevailed over his biggest opponent, himself. And then in verse 29, Jacob asked the man for his name, and God said, "Why? You know who I am." And indeed, Jacob did, because he said in verse 30, he named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life was preserved." That limp tells us it was real. This was not just a dream. You know, I did some searching, and I have, of course, I'll know by the time we get to the end of Genesis, but I kind of did some searching and some looking through to see if there is any other instance when it talks about him limping. Because Alistair Begg, I mean, and some of you have heard this story before, and this has got to be it's got to be 25, 30 years ago. I used to listen to him a lot on Joy 62, and I was driving down, I don't remember if it's actual highway, somewhere I was driving down the road, and I was fixing to get over a turn lane, and that image is just in my mind. But Alistair Begg was teaching on this right here, and he said when he got to the end of the chapter, he said when he got to the end of Jacob's life, when he blessed his sons, there in Egypt, he said he blessed them leaning on that staff. And he remembered that night that he'd wrestled with God. And I broke into tears. And I thought, I want to know Scripture well enough that I can see something somewhere else and know what it refers back to. And that started kind of my journey towards studying the way that I do. But I don't know that is an incident that actually happened, because I couldn't find it. But he does bless his sons, and he does have his staff there with him. So he walked with that limp for the rest of his life. And every step he took, he remembered how that happened, how that hip was dislocated. God had appeared to Jacob in dreams twice. But this time, God appeared in person and got a hold of Jacob. And Jacob was never the same. As I said, each step he took for the rest of his life became a statement about that night that he learned this lesson. Now, did that answer all of your questions about this? Did you have other questions, other things that popped up as you read this?
I've never seen it like that before.
I had neither until I began studying it sometime back, and I had a lot of these notes, but I was anxious in that regard. I was looking forward to it because I was anxious to put all those notes together.
Yeah, that's so relevant to where we are now.
Exactly.
It's totally relevant.
Yeah.
And the fact that he saw God face to face, he saw the face of God.
Yeah.
And it says, and he lived.
And he lived to tell the tale. Right, exactly. But it just, when you think about what wrestling is, and the rolling around in the dirt and the dark,
And how painful
How
it
painful.
would have been to dislocate your hip.
yeah,
Well, when he was really doing all that wrestling and refused to let go of everything, what was he wanting? I mean, to know assurance that he was going to be safe?
I think so.
That's what it.
well,
It was funny,
the
the
wrestling,
shirts
the wrestling, I believe, stemmed from the question, do you trust me or not? And he's wrestling with God over whether he trusts him. I said he was going to be okay, or whether he trusts himself. Who does he really trust in this? The fact that it came about in a physical encounter, but that's how each of us wrestle, actually. Do you trust me or not?
And that's why it's so relevant
Exactly.
to us.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Because we've all wrestled.
That's
All
the
right,
races of
until
our
they are.
fears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had some long nights.
Exactly. So, as I've said, I have both looked forward to this and dreaded it because of that question. Do you trust me? I asked a few weeks ago if fear and faith could live in the same body. And I think this is a perfect example of when that happens. I believe they can because I've wrestled those same wrestlings. And you'd think you do it once. Hopefully Jacob did it once and it was over. Mine is never over at once. So it's an example of do you trust me or not? Rich Bitterman, a man that a pastor I found on Twitter, and I've been following his writings for a good while. He wrote about this chapter a few weeks ago, and I made notes on what he wrote because I wanted to keep up with that. It's just very, like you said, so relevant to us. And he said, God will break what you lean on so that you can and will lean on Him. And then he added, broken men and women pray differently. And honestly, as Linda said, we can look back and we can see, thank God I'm not where I need to be, want to be, but thank God I'm not where I was. But I have some loved ones, and I'm sure you all do too, that I fear for what it will take to get them to fully surrender to God. Now, they're believers. They're Christians. I fully believe that. But they're not totally surrendered to God. And it scares. I pray that God in His mercy will draw them and their hearts will soften and surrender to Him. But Jacob's wouldn't. Jacob was going to be in control until God got a hold of him. But the reason that I've dreaded this chapter is because in all three of these groups, I know some of your all's wrestlings. Your wrestling matches come not because you haven't surrendered to God. That's not where your wrestling comes from. You have surrendered to God. But because in some cases when you have those, you have nothing else to cling to but God. There is nowhere else to go for answers but to wrestle. He said, when God dislocates something you've leaned on, your ability, your job, or I don't know what that word is. I didn't write it clear enough. But then he says, you held on in a different way. You crumbled, you clung, you begged for blessing. Not because you deserved it, but because you had nothing else to hold on to. We've all been there. And in all three groups, I know some of the places and times that you have wrestled. I'm always reminded of John 6, verse 66. Remember, it's 666. But when many of Jesus' followers left him, you remember? Mm-hmm. And he turns to Peter and says, to the 12, and says, are y'all going to go too? And you remember what Peter says?
Where else would we go?
Where else would we go? But in that I see, I'd like to, but where else am I going to go? This is not easy anymore. But where else am I going to go? As the hymn says, where could I go but to the Lord? There is nowhere else. Yeah, some of the things that the women in these groups have told me after Bible study, some of those 3x5 cards that I get out of the ice cream box, sometimes they have a name, sometimes they don't. And then even those who would have what they call less serious prayers. I know that many of you are up at night wrestling. Do I trust God or not? And you know I'm up some nights asking, do I trust God or not? There is a hymn, and I couldn't remember. I've read it this week. I don't know where I read it now. I didn't have it in my notes. There is a hymn titled, O Love That Wilt Not Let Me Go. y'all know that hymn? Even if you sing hymns, you probably don't sing this one because it has a really weird tune
Yeah.
to it. But the words are so powerful. It was written by George Matheson, who lived in the late 1800s. When he found out that he was going blind, his fiancée left him. And his sister was taking care of him. And then his sister got engaged, and he was afraid she was going to leave too. And he went into a fit of depression over who's going to care for him. And as the story goes, he wrote this hymn in 5 minutes. The first verse, the first line is, "O love, thou wilt not let me go. I rest my weary soul in thee. I give thee back the life I owe, that in thine ocean depths its flow may richer, fuller be." So the next time you're up at night wrestling, and God is saying to you or to me, "Do you trust me?" Just remember, there is a love that will not let you go. Amen? Amen. Any other comments or questions or anything I didn't touch on in that question that you had about Jacob?
Well, there was one point that I wanted to make, but it's way back on the.
Way back.
Yeah, I meant to make it. I meant to.
And I was
say
just
that. Well,
freight training on down the road.
no, I didn't want to interrupt you. But it said when Jacob, on the second verse where it says when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp."
Oh,
So
yeah.
he named the place where that is.
Whatever that is.
And you were saying that you had to. Some people thought that angels were guarding the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they were there when he left,
Yeah.
and then he saw them when he came back. And where they get that from is God did set angels over the Garden of Eden, remember, so that Adam and Eve couldn't go back in. And then after the flood and after all this, some believe that angels protected the land of Canaan, the promised land.
But you were saying that you believed that the angels were with Jacob all the
I just
time.
said, it just, that was a thought I had.
I agree with you, and the reason why I agreed with it, it said that this is God's camp or encampment.
Mhm.
Well, if you're encamped around somebody, you're
Yeah.
kind of there.
Yeah,
I mean, you're
yeah,
not,
yeah, you move with
you
them.
move with them.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a fixture.
Well,
Yeah.
this encampment word is the same word that's used for when they built the tabernacle and the 12 tribes were encamped
Mm-hmm.
on the four sides of the tabernacle. So it's the
Yeah.
same word. So yeah, I
And when
just
they
got a
moved,
feeling that they went
yeah.
with him, but the scripture doesn't say that. It just said he saw them here, but I just,
It's that word encampment.
that word encampment, they
That
moved with
makes
him.
me think that it moved.
Yeah.
I mean, there might have been other angels that guarded the borders.
Yeah, yeah. You stay here and you go here. Yeah, exactly. Right. What else? All right. Well, let's pray. God, all I can say to begin with is, I'm sorry. Forgive me for the times when